Welcome to another episode of Civic Cipher. I am your host, Ramses Ja.
Okay, so DJ Q Ward.
Good run.
We'll talk about it. For now, y'all can just call me Q.
Yes, indeed. And, another great show for you, another great episode. Some things I'm really excited to talk about. So stick around your radios because we are going to, I believe, coin a new term.
Word. I love when we do that.
Yes. And it's going to be based on just experience. But I think it's very real. And I think a lot of, especially black folks who have similar experiences, will be able to relate to. But stick around for that. We also are going to talk about a study that was published in the Los Angeles Times and was reported to us by The Root about how police officers interact with different races differently. And, for those of us who know better, it kind of goes without saying, but I think that, we're going to peel away a few layers and really see what that feels like and some of the outcomes that result from those types of interactions, and maybe what we can do better moving forward to prevent some of what we've been seeing and throughout the history of this country, to be honest with you. And we also have an excellent Baba segment today, our Become a Better Ally segment, and I also think it's important for us to start off with some Ebony Excellence. So we'll kick it off right here and give a shout out to Levar Burton.
All I do is win, 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 no matter what.
Now, for those who don't know, Levar Burton he's Geordi LaForge from Star Trek. I'm a Star Trek nerd. I'm sorry. I know that you're probably listening to this on a really cool radio station. I'm just not that guy. I'm super nerd, and fortunately I'm in good company because Q is a nerd too, and I would venture to guess that so is DJ Swirl, our show producer.
He's the star of Reading Rainbow to me.
Yeah. So
and
that's
luckily
really...
for y'all, I can't sing because I would be giving you the reading. Listen, don't Ramses.
I can go twice as high.
Don't do it, bro. Take a look. Okay, I stop.
Anyway, shout out to him having a great career. But, something that happened recently is, as we all know, Alex Trebek from Jeopardy passed away.
Rest in peace.
And just another legendary icon in the entertainment world. And, I caught wind that Levar Burton wanted to step in and take over that role. And as we know, typically that role has been held by a white man. And so it's sometimes uncomfortable, especially in middle America, to see that job shift away from a white-skinned person to a black-skinned person. And so he's had to campaign for this. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going to give him a shot. So we're really excited to see what comes of that. Levar Burton should always stay unbothered and moisturized, as he puts on his Twitter feed, and we love to see it. And next stop is Idris Elba becoming the next James Bond. I believe it's possible.
You think they're gonna let it happen?
I'm gonna believe, man. I'm a believer. I'm an optimist. And
you guys listen, so Ramses is definitely a believer and an optimist.
And the thing is, we can share. He can be James Bond for a couple movies, and then it could go back to someone white. And man, we could have some other folks. Maybe Middle Eastern. I think it's possible, man. James Bond is an idea, and we can share ideas with each other as brothers and sisters. And I very much look forward to the day when that is normalized. But that is a perfect opportunity to segue into our first topic for discussion today. And something that I really wanted to get into for a long time. This has kind of been on my mind for a bit. Recently I heard it was just in the background, some sort of arbitrary dialogue or something like that. But the term white guilt came up, right? It's a term that in our arena is, thrown around quite a bit. And white guilt is one of the things that, in my belief and my understanding, is basically the feeling that some white people have when coming to terms with the fact that people who are not white have a tougher go in some areas of their lives, and it's because they're not white. That's the primary reason for it. And so some white folks feel guilty about that, and as a result they will try in their own way to bring a little bit of balance to the universe. And so it sounds bad.
For some it is, though, because there are others who that guilt makes them push back
the other way. Yeah, sure.
No, that's not true, because it makes them feel bad about themselves.
Sure. And that's something that a lot of white people resist. And we see that. I don't have to guess. We actually see that in media and in real life, in day-to-day interactions. But in any event, that is what it is. That's how that term is used when discussing, the way that we interact and relate to each other as races, as black people with respect to white people and brown people and Native people and so forth. There's a lot of well-documented instances of, if we're talking about a people, white people doing very hurtful and harmful things and damaging things to races of people that are not white. We're going to speak later on in the show about our Native brothers and sisters, and obviously they have a well-documented history of getting the short end of the stick when it comes to their interactions with white folks, which is why we need critical race theory in schools. Every time you give me a microphone, I'll say it. But yeah, so that's white guilt. And I believe that there is such a thing as black guilt. Now, hear me out. And I do want to get your thoughts on this.
Expound.
Yes, hear me out. For me, I recognize that, oh God, this is going to be tough to say, because there are some people who listen to our show that are very fiery individuals, fiery speakers, and they know that we've been done wrong, and they know that it's our time and we need to get our reparation, all these things, and they're not wrong. They're right. I agree 100%. But me being the person that I am in the middle of myself, I recognize that no matter what happens, we all have to get there together, wherever there is, right? And I recognize that the world is changing for white people, perhaps at a faster pace than it ever has before. I think that this show illustrates that point, because it's very likely that the person who owns the radio station that you're listening to our voices on, and the shareholders, is a majority white folks, right? But they've allowed us to have a little bit of time to speak with you, the listener, so that we can share our thoughts on what it's like to be black in America, and hopefully empower you as our allies and empower our black brothers and sisters and Native and Hispanic and so forth. But the world is very much changing. The population is changing. The life expectancy for white people is getting shorter. And when you've been in that position for such a long time where you don't have to worry about those sorts of things, you're just kind of secure comfortably in your space. When the world starts changing around you, any human being would be a little bit unsettled by that, and so there's a part of me that has to recognize that this is not easy for white people, white people that are well-intentioned and mean well and want an equitable experience for all of us in this country, and the white people that don't want that, the white people that resist it. It's got to be uncomfortable on some level for everyone, because we're talking about race and we're talking about shifting away from a traditional hierarchy of race in this country toward a more equitable one. And even if that is 100 years in the future, when we actually achieve that, the fact that the conversation is center stage, more so now than in the past 20, 30 years in this country, it's got to be a bit unsettling. I know in the back of people's minds, they have to worry, like, are you going to harm me? Are you going to, if I give up some power, is it going to come back to affect me negatively, right? And as a feeling, empathetic black person, I try to recognize the human experience that my Caucasian brothers and sisters are enduring or experiencing. Enduring is kind of, me being a little bit, it's a little bit too heavy a word, but experiencing, and empathizing and recognizing like, hey, listen, let me make sure that you understand and you're secure and you know that I love you. This needs to happen, but I love you and I'll be there for you. I'll be an ally the same way that you're being an ally to me. I'll stand with you if you stand with me, these sorts of things. And we saw a video the other day where there was a woman who was in, I want to say it was like a makeup store, and she was getting filmed in the makeup store. She was going full Karen, and it
was actually a Victoria's Secret.
Was that it? Okay, sorry. Victoria's Secret store. She was going full Karen, and she's on video, and then all of a sudden she drops to the floor and starts wailing, right? Full on Karen, 110%. So those tears to the right audience makes her the victim in that story. And it seemed like, she just slipped right into that role,
Well, she performed passing out first.
Yeah.
Like, you have to see the video.
Sure.
We'll make that available for you.
Yeah. But, for now, just take my word for it. But I recognize that not every white person is that. But, there's I'm sure there's a spectrum, and there's some folks who are well-intentioned. They mean well. They do their best. They try to live a good life, and they might make a mistake. They might misspeak. They might not know the new social norms. Don't touch my hair. For those that can't see me, I have a lot of hair, and that happens to me quite a bit. And I know that the right thing to do is correct everybody, right? But sometimes it's hard for me to do that because I know that, I need you to keep believing that I'm your friend, that we're on the same team here. And so I'll let you have that. And I think that is the black guilt, where it's like, it's a tricky game we got to play here, because I don't want you to start crying and thinking that I'm canceling you. And and I feel guilty because I know that you mean well, but we have to learn that some things we still have a ways to go in a lot of areas. And I can't afford to lose you as an ally. So I can't afford to lay all of my demands at your feet right now. I got to do it one at a time, incrementally. And so there's some things that might happen, and I just have to look past them. Some things I can't, but, for those that know, this show was born out of an old radio programmer telling me that he did not want to do a black show. That was his exact words. But a little bit more was that he didn't want to do a show that spoke to what was going on in the streets in 2020. And I felt that was necessary. And when he made that decision, Q and I, we decided to step away and do our own show, which you're hearing now. Also, that station doesn't exist anymore. So everybody that supported us, we appreciate you. But
wow.
But that's a battle that I had to pick. But there were many other battles in that radio station that I could not die on those hills. And I think that what I was experiencing in hindsight was black guilt. I know that you don't know what my experience is like. And I also know that I can't put too much on you. Otherwise, I risk losing you, because the right's narrative is these people ask for too much. They're looking at it the wrong way. Slavery was a thing that happened all over the world, and they completely ignore the fact that there was a very unique form of slavery that took place in this country that really existed to dehumanize and brutalize. It didn't incorporate people into the family and the fabric of society. You know, there's a million things we could talk about for a million hours, but you know, if you want to tell yourself a different story, you can. And if you want to recruit people, you can. And if I'm the person in your office demanding that you check all these boxes right now, it's so easy for you to subscribe to a different narrative that fits the worldview that you have. And so that black guilt, it creeps in, and it causes me to feel like I shouldn't ask for too much. You know, I can't afford for this to get away from me. And so I think it's a real thing that exists, and I can't be the only one, right?
So it's really interesting that you bring this up, because I've expressed to you before how sometimes it is difficult to do our show because I feel like someone's going to hear it. They're going to feel bad. And for that reason, they'll tune us out completely. And it's hard to not pile on when there's so much nuance, right? If there was ever a collective expression of guilt, right? You mentioned the word reparations earlier. The idea that that hasn't happened is insane when you review the truths of black people on this soil. And that's why the piling on for people like us sometimes feels necessary. Like, how are there people that still don't want to acknowledge our plight? So it seems unfair to those that do. And when they're both a part of the same group, it's hard not to speak to both people. It's like giving a lecture to both of your children when one of them is the class president and the valedictorian and has never been in trouble, and the one you just bailed out. Giving them the same lecture is not fair.
Yeah.
Even though they're both your kids, they're both in the same car, they're in the same age group, they live in the same house, they have the same rules. The one that's the class president and valedictorian is sitting there almost enraged that they have to sit through this conversation. Mom, Dad, I know. So it's very difficult doing the show the way that we do it with the topics that we're forced to address, because we hope that if you're listening to a station that has our show on it, that there are going to be a lot of things that you can at least empathize with us on. Right? But sometimes, if you're a white person, you can feel attacked by a show like this.
Yeah.
And even if at your core you actually agree with what we're saying, when it sounds like we're identifying you as the culprit, it's hard not to say, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And want to stand up for yourself,
yeah,
even though you're not the person that we're talking about.
Right.
So I've felt that black guilt, if that's what we're calling it.
Yeah.
Because even in our production meetings, when we're talking with Swirl, I'm like, man, are we piling on? Are we talking about the same types of things too much? And the reason why I'm so quick to snap out of it and say no is because we're not talking about, we never have a show where the things we're talking about happened 9 months ago. It might be the same thing that happened 9 months ago, but it's a brand new story.
Yeah.
So it's like, you guys can't see me, the shrug and facial expression that you're getting from me right now. It's like, well,
It's still happening.
It's
regularly.
still happening. Regularly isn't even a good enough word, right? There's things that
with frequency
at a frequency that we can't keep up with. Sure. There's stories that we've missed just because our show isn't on frequent enough.
Yeah.
In the weeks in between, so much more happens that, we just kind of end up moving to the next or most recent thing that happened that might sound and feel the same. So, man, you're absolutely right, because I've felt it, I've dealt with it, I try to reconcile, and like I said, even when we're doing our show, it's something that I think about, like, man, I do not want to alienate people that support us.
Yeah.
Because the description sounds like them, right? Because it's so, in so many occurrences, it's police officer or white man or white people. And because there's such variance, we can't say the white lady whose name we don't know at the Victoria's Secret in whatever city that's in with every occurrence. We can't point specifically to name, person, time, date, description. So we just generally say white police officer, for instance. So yeah, man, it's not black and white. It's not straightforward. It's not cut and dry. It's a really difficult line to toe, because we have to address the things that we address, but it is not easy to keep from alienating people that are a part of that group, but not of it, in the group, but not of it, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean. And there's something that happens in media. And this show doesn't really fit that format. And I don't think that it ever will. But for different reasons. And there's kind of like a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And so these are the sorts of things that dominate the news cycle. But the nature of our show is a little different. And we have an objective. We don't inform people for the sake of informing people, because you can just be alive and click on any news, whatever in your pocket, and become informed. We try to provide context and have long form discussions about race relations and about how do we empower each other to reach the level of equity that I think that we can reach. And this is kind of what we're going for. And so the stories that we choose to, deal with are pointed in that direction. And so that's why this is not a blood and guts show every time. That's why we can talk about things like concepts like this one, Black guilt, and so forth. And so it's a little bit different show. But I think that, in doing so, like you said, we have to also reconcile how is this going to hit people? Because we know, someone said it, it's actually been said quite a bit, that black people are not looking for revenge at all, just looking for a fair go at life. And we get to decide based on our vantage point and how the world looks to us, what that is. Because, so many times throughout history, forgive me, white people have been the ones dictating what is fair. And almost invariably, it is way more fair if you are also white, and way less fair if you are not a white person as well. And there's obviously examples of white folks discriminating against other white folks as well. But, it's a power struggle, and more often than not,
and that typically isn't because they're white. And that's the very clear and obvious difference. They're, maybe it's because they're poor. Maybe it's because they have different religious beliefs. Maybe because their accent is different. They were born on a different soil, but it's not typically because they're white. It's for some other reason.
Sure.
In way too many cases, this shell that we walk around in is our crime. It is the reason why we're being held back, discriminated against, judged,
and on and on.
Hurt.
And there's something else to be said. While we're here, I want to say it. We are very critical of policing as an institution, and certainly critical of certain officers as well. But we do have a dialogue with a few officers. One that comes to mind is there's a guy named Marcel. There's a guy named Kevin. These are Kevin is a sheriff's officer. Marcel reaches out to us on our social media, and we recognize that police are humans too. We prefer the police who are humans first, but that doesn't mean that we can't be critical of the system that employs them and advocate for change on their behalf, and hopefully inspire them to advocate for change from within. And so, long story short, these are my thoughts on Black guilt, But if you're white and listening, just know, hey, we love you. And we know that you love us, and that's not lost on us. And we're going to get through this thing together.
And now,
Proper propaganda.
Watch it. Pull my mic back. You like that? Journalists with journalists too. We can strike back. Hardcore reporters with orders from headquarters. Behind enemy lines, sidestepping the borders.
If you're just tuning in to Civic Cipher, I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
they call me.
Q. Okay.
Let's just go with Q.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, if you're just tuning in, I definitely want you to stick around. We're going to be talking about a study that was done a little later in the show where it was determined on a scientific basis, what we already know, but that's that police officers speak to and interact with black drivers less respectfully than white drivers. We're also going to discuss a way Black history fact. This time we're going to stand in solidarity with our Native brothers and sisters, a story we've been wanting to get to for a long time, of uncovering some bodies that were buried of some Native children. We're going to get into that in just a bit. But first, let's discuss how to become a better ally. So, if you don't know, there is we'll call him a social media activist. This is a term that Q came up with.
Right on.
His name is Maximilian Clark. And for those that follow our social media at Civic Cipher, I think it's up on our Instagram. You can go and check it out. It might be a few posts ago, but it's still there. And basically this guy he just gets on stage in this video. He has like a stream of consciousness and a microphone and an audience. And of course, he's a white man. So you see, we're not critical of everyone. You know? But see, that's my black guilt, having to establish that, right? Anyway, at first glance, seems to be a wonderful human being. We've been able to share a few of his videos in our group chats, and he very much deals with the reality of the world that he lives in, and is not afraid to tell the truth. He doesn't obscure anything. He puts it all out there in the front. And the level of confidence that he speaks with when he's talking about the importance of critical race theory. He kind of speaks to an audience with some irony, to make them laugh and to, help them to understand. He says something about MLK. He's like, we should teach people about MLK, but we shouldn't teach them that the FBI tried to ruin his life. And we should teach people about, World War II, but we shouldn't teach about the internment camps for the Japanese, And, everyone gets a chuckle out of that, but he's making some valid points. And we all thought that would be an excellent example to share with you, the listener, on how to become a better ally, because that's what an ally looks like in our estimation. So once again, check out our social media on Instagram at Civic Cipher.
Yeah, him pointing out the obvious hypocrisy in the omissions that our government is trying to make in education. It's funny, but in a way where it disarms your
aversion to it.
Yeah.
Listening. Yeah, absolutely. So, now to the good stuff.
Were you being facetious there when you say to the good stuff?
Yeah.
Brace yourselves.
All right. So The Root is another place where we source show content. The Atlanta Black Star, black publications that highlight black stories. So I read this on The Root. I think it's fair to share those whenever we come across them. Basically, the headline is, police officers speak to black drivers less respectfully than white drivers. Before we get into this, I want to ask two questions to two people that I know. One of them is DJ Swirl. Swirl, does this surprise you that police officers speak to black drivers less respectfully than white drivers? Are you surprised by that?
You're talking about speaking facetiously?
No. Does it surprise you? Just straight answer. Gotta make
Not-
sure I'm not alone.
Not an iota.
Q. Same question. Does it surprise you?
I was completely taken aback when I learned of this information. I'm actually offended that you asked. Not sure how I feel about the point that you're trying to make or the type of light that you're shining on our men and women in law enforcement.
Well, here's something that I will do before we even get into this. I would say that there's a lot of people in positions of authority who, especially if they're not black people, who are going to speak more respectfully to non-black people than they will to black people. That's I think that's very much woven into the culture of this country, not just in the law enforcement. I don't think there are many people who are black or melanated who would disagree with that. But now we have a scientific basis to have this conversation with respect to policing in this country. And so I'll give you a little bit of background on how this story was or how this study was done. So the American Psychological Association conducted an analysis of body cam footage, and they would take like 10, 15 seconds of police interactions, perhaps when they're first walking up to the door. It's an article, so it's not a full scientific published paper. But from what I read, that's kind of how they gathered their research. They took thousands of videos and they quantified, and I'm sure they had parameters for what was respectful and decidedly less respectful, and they, checked each box accordingly. And found along the lines of race that white motorists were approached in a more respectful manner by police. And this study was backed by the Los Angeles Times and published in the LA Times. And I think that everybody, there's some people that, look at police and say, the police really are here to protect us. I'm talking about everybody of every color. There's a group of people that it doesn't matter what color they are. They say the police are here for us. I've never had a bad experience with the police. I've always done what I'm supposed to do. I don't worry about the police. That is a real segment of every population. I will cede that entirely. But what I think more often happens is there are people who would prefer to have no interaction with the police whatsoever, because if the police show up, usually it's because of some drama. Same with the fire department. God bless the fire department. If I never saw them, that'd be fine with me. That just means nothing in my world is burned down, right? So I'm glad they're there. No disrespect. Shout out to the fire department, but I'm sure they don't want to put out fires because usually that means that people are suffering and dealing with whatever. It'd be better to prevent fires, in the first place. Defund the police. Anyway, so most folks will say, police are just, no one likes getting a ticket. No one likes, interacting with the police. If the police show up and you try to tell your story and they're not on your side, or they come with a bad attitude, I'm sure that if you've lived long enough, you've come across, a police officer with a God complex and a gun, and with that badge is able to kind of move with impunity, and so has no regard for you as a human being. You are beneath him or her, and they have no problem letting you feel that. And so there's lots of people who have had those types of experiences, and I would guess that those are people who interact with the police more frequently, because it's more often that it's more likely rather that you'll come across those types of police officers, which, as we know around here, are plentiful. Those God complex police officers that do what I say now. What I said do this, No, officer, I'm not, Anyway, the story, Q. So, a lot of people will be able to say something similar. They'll be like, police don't talk respectfully to me either, and I'm not even black. Police, that's just how police are. You just try to avoid them, stay in your own lane, and, whatever. But the reality of the situation is that the culture of policing has shifted away from like investigative policing and responsive, like, okay, something happened, let me go and respond to it, more toward let's just find what we can get on the streets. They have computers that run your license plates. They don't even type it in. When I was little, they used to have to type in a license plate if they suspected a car of something, if it was swerving or whatever. Now it's a computer that does it. They're just checking every car just to see, if there's somebody worth pulling over. Part of that might be because they're trying to be safe and keep both hands on the wheel, but I maintain that they're just looking for trouble. And if you're looking for something, you'll find it even if it's not there, as you and I both know. So the problem is that establishes that it's not realistic to just move through life knowing full well that if you just keep your nose clean, that the police will never interact with you, right? You can do your very best. As you know, and as I know, neither of us, Q, have done a drug. We've never even drank alcohol. Certainly don't break the law. We don't have any reason to break the law. Why would we ever do that? And I probably get pulled over all the time. I'm out late because I'm a DJ, whatever. And then the many cars I've had over the years, some of them look like drug dealer cars. I'll admit that. It's not something I'm proud of, but once upon a time, I like rims. What are you going to do? It's cultural. Let me live. So,
shout out to rims.
Once upon a time. But anyway, what happens is you end up interacting with these police, and my experience has been less than pleasant most of the time, mostly because the police are, it's like I've already been convicted of the crime that they are looking for. And it seems like you got something to say. So I'd love you to jump in right there.
Let me tell you a really cool thing about being the official DJ of the Phoenix Suns. At Phoenix Suns home basketball games, there are a lot of police officers on site. Except I am head to toe in NBA and Phoenix Suns logos. And then I have this badge with a big picture of me on it. It's very, very official. And I say hello to every officer in the arena when I see them. And in that setting, they all reflect the same energy that I give them. Right? Because when they look at me, they get to already make up their mind, oh, that guy works for the Suns.
He's one of the good ones.
Even if they didn't see me on the center hang.
Yeah.
Walking towards them, it's clear to see, oh, this guy works for the team. And there is a built-in response for people that work for the team, especially in an official capacity, because there's a lot of temporary workers that work concessions or our GSRs that greet our guests. But somebody that looks official, there's a built-in response to that. You've heard me bring up on the show before, part of the response that was desired from the Black Lives Matter movement was not treat white people worse.
Not at all.
Just give us the same resemblance of dignity and respect that you show white people. I think in most interactions, and it doesn't matter the race of the police officer, when the person in question isn't black, they're a citizen that might have made a mistake, even when there's clear evidence that this person absolutely did something illegal.
Horrible, yeah.
But like you said, the officer's a human being first, and they treat this person like they're a human being first too. Mm-hmm. And that's how that interaction goes down. Mm-hmm. So even if that person does end up in handcuffs and in jail, getting there was a lot more humane.
Dignified.
The narrative for people that look like us for so long has been that we're by nature criminals.
They're guilty until proven innocent.
They approach us as the criminal who's just being a criminal. not a human being that may have made a mistake. And when the very nature of what you do is colored in by that narrative, it's almost impossible to treat us the same, because that starts before you become a police officer.
That's the world that you grow up in.
And then the infrastructure that you enter yourself into as a police officer just fortifies
Absolutely
all those thoughts and beliefs that you already had. So for us, this study was completely unnecessary.
Absolutely.
We live it. But as you know, and as we've talked about, there are a lot of people that would like to openly and proudly, with their chest out, deny any of that truth.
That's why it's good that
And that's why it's necessary
to have the
for a
science
study
behind
like
it.
that to happen.
So watch this. I got a direct quote here. This comes from Diane Goldstein. It says, she's one of the people that worked on the study. It really reflects the amount of work that law enforcement needs to continue to do, right? To approach people like they're people first. Now, the reason that's significant is because, you know, there's a very like a foundational story with respect to this show. And we've told it a few times on the air, where Q and I were both pulled over in Mississippi, driving from Florida to Arizona in a brand new Porsche. And we got pulled over in Mississippi in the middle of the night, for those that don't know, and had a bit of an interaction. And, you know, I don't need to tell the whole story again, but it took a long time. It was over nothing. And
Literally, not over something small, over nothing.
Literally, there was nothing. But we were pulled over in the darkest of forests, as you can possibly
Never
imagine.
seen anything like it.
There was no moonlight, nothing.
So dark.
Even the fireflies left. It was just, we were just out there. But I guess I have to tell a little bit of the story. So forgive me if you've heard this before. We get pulled over because there's a little bit of there's grooves in the paint in Mississippi that make noise if the tire comes in contact with the paint. It's not the same in Arizona. The grooves lie outside of the white line. And so we're driving and, you know, listening to music, road tripping, you know, having a good time. Make a little bit of noise for about a half second. It wasn't even a full second. It wasn't even that long, in the way I remember it. But if it was, then sure. And a quarter mile later, there's lights behind us. We get pulled over. Typically, if a car is swerving, the officer will want to check to see if the driver is inebriated, or if there's, you know, the driver otherwise presents a threat to road safety. Now it's like 2 a.m. There's no cars out. And this gentleman to my left is speaking to this officer, which, by the way, Q is one of the most intelligent human beings in the world. And I know a lot of them.
Scariest police siren light combination of my adult life.
Can't see nothing because they were blinding lights. But, you know, he gets pulled out of the car. And it was completely unnecessary, because you could determine at first glance, okay, these guys just, and we explained, like, hey, we didn't know that in Arizona where we're from, it's not like that. So we've never driven in Mississippi before. Our bad, you know, no harm, no foul. We just made a little bit of noise in the middle of nowhere that only you heard. We haven't committed any offense to anyone else. No need to go beyond that.
However, yes, sir, I will step out of the car.
Sure. And then, long story short, they end up pulling me out of the car. We're like up against the police car now. They're, you know, checking the car. Then they bring the dogs out to smell the car, you know, and then they tell us that the dogs smell drugs in the brand new Porsche. And then they have to search the car again. And so we're just stuck on the side of the road. And, you know, it was a bunch of nonsense. And ultimately we were able to get out of there. It's a much scarier story than I'm telling you, but for the sake of time, you know, that's effectively what happened. Now, if we were an older white couple, let's say Q, you're 65-year-old privileged corporate executive, and I am CFO of a business, and we're good.
May I interject?
Sure.
If we were just
White.
two older white people, right? Because we wouldn't have worn our careers on our jackets.
That's fair.
We wouldn't have presented them with a business card to know what we did, right? So if our description was different,
Yeah.
if we looked like we belonged in this nice car,
Yeah.
while also
I'm
being
glad you
white,
said that. I'm glad you said that, because that you're absolutely
our
right.
interaction would have been incredibly different.
And I know that the amount of dignity would have been higher.
You're allowed to have so much more dignity and self-respect.
Right. It's unfathomable that if you're white and older,
Like,
that
you can
they
be
would-
threatening and aggressive and mean and disrespectful
and they'll
to the
still be
police if
respectful
you're
back.
white.
Yeah, they'll still be respectful back. And it's the craziest thing. And then, of course, we present no threat, challenge, nothing. The most benevolent roll over. Look, here's my belly. I mean you no harm. Please do not kill me on the side of the road because you're scared of something that doesn't exist.
Please do not kill us on the side of this road was my only thought for the near 2 hours we spent outside on the side of the highway in Mississippi at what I think was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Please do not kill us.
Because when they first walked up, it seemed like they came with a little bit of energy that we weren't really expecting.
Especially officer, sergeant, drill sergeant, sir sergeant, sir detective, inspector,
Yeah, he was
sheriff,
an officer
deputies,
first, not-
officer, sergeant, sir.
Yeah,
I think that was his name.
yeah, that was it.
Especially
I think
him.
that was it. I saw his badge. But the point is that this is the sort of interaction that's the norm. I've interacted with lots of police throughout my life. Never been arrested.
Isn't that something?
Never been arrested.
Been handcuffed, been placed in the back of cars, shoved on the hood of cars.
Yeah.
Never arrested.
A man gone through my backpack when I was in school. Pulled me out of the car in front of my family. That sort of stuff. All that stuff has happened. Never been arrested because I never
I
did
had
anything
officers take the seats out of my car before,
wrong. You see what I mean?
and then when they were finished, just left.
Just leave it like
so
that.
I had to figure out how to reinstall seats.
Listen, man, it bees like that. And so, there's definitely something to be said about this type of approach to black motorists escalating, because black people are no different from any other creature, that's endowed with consciousness that, demands its respect and its dignity and its right to move about unencumbered by artificial restraints and so forth. And some black people know how to play the game like we do, and they do it for most of their lives. And then there's everyone has a day when it's like, what, I deserve better than this. And I say this quite a bit, most of the time it's off the air, but, I say it all the time, like, I don't want to die on a sidewalk. I don't want that to be my story. And I get death threats for doing this show all the time. People are just pretty upset with me for doing this and saying these things, but, this is my path. I have to walk this path now, and I have to say these things. And I do recognize that it's okay to demand respect. It's okay to give respect and expect it in return, but it's also it has to be a two-way street. And now that we have definitive evidence of exactly what's going on here, we can start to, do better.
Yes, sir. And before you move on to our esteemed show producer, DJ Swirl, how you are able to deal with the comments that we get from doing this show, I do not know. I got a glimpse of them from him the other day and made my stomach hurt. And it was like 3 kind of vanilla comments, but it was just knowing where they came from and what they represented that just kind of turned my stomach. I know we get way worse stuff than that I make it my business not to ever see or read or come into contact with, because life is hard enough by itself.
What more could I say? I wouldn't be here today if the old school didn't pave the way. What more could I say? I wouldn't be here today if the old school didn't pave the way.
Swirl, what you got for us?
kill the mood real quick. For today's Way Black History Fact, we are reaching out to our Native brothers and sisters and highlighting the recent finding of hundreds more unmarked graves found at former residential schools in Canada. For decades, the indigenous children were taken from their families, sometimes by force, and housed in crowded, church-run boarding schools where they were abused and prohibited from speaking their native tongue. Thousands vanished altogether. Now, a discovery offers chilling evidence that many of the missing children may have died at these schools. The remains of as many as 751.
Hold on,
mainly,
excuse me?
751 mainly indigenous children were found at the site of a former school in the province of Saskatchewan. The burial site, the largest one to date, was uncovered only weeks after the remains of 215 children were found in unmarked graves on the grounds of another former church-run school for indigenous students in British Columbia. The discoveries have jolted a nation grappling with the generations of widespread and systematic abuse for indigenous people, many of whom are survivors of the boarding schools. For decades, they suggested through their oral histories that thousands of children disappeared from the schools, but they were often met with skepticism. The revelations of 2 unmarked grave sites are another searing reminder of this traumatic period in history. These recent unearthings of remains in Canada have reverberated globally, including in the U.S., where this week the Interior Secretary said the country would search federal boarding schools for possible burial sites as well of Native American children. Hundreds of thousands of them were forcibly taken from their communities to be culturally assimilated in the schools for more than a century.
What article is that?
This is from the New York Times.
Okay.
Wow.
I want to say a couple things before we get into that. I want your reaction because you seem to really have something, but I want to say a couple things. One, this show is a black space. We will always share this space with people who have similar plight with us, and it doesn't matter if they're black or not. If we get to make the rules, then that's our rule. So if you're Native, if you're Hispanic, this is your show too. Yes? But this show has to do with the United States of America. And this story comes from Canada. But where we live in Phoenix, Arizona, anyone that's been to Phoenix before knows that there's a street called Indian School Road, and it spans the length of the city. And on Indian School Road, you guessed it, there's an Indian school. That's what they used to call it. And in the late 90s, I want to say, I remember hearing stories of the cruelty that took place in that school in the early 1900s, and in their efforts to assimilate the Native children and to strip them of their culture and, you know, all these sorts of things, and the abuse that took place there. And I'm not an expert, so I will not speak on that. But, you know, if you're listening to my voice and you're familiar with this story or any other stories, again, this space is your space too, and you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'll, you know, these stories need to be told, and we need to discuss them so that we can all move forward together. But the reason that this story in Canada stood out to me is because I knew that story from growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to school on Indian School Road. I went to Central High School. Shout out the Bobcats. And I went to Osborne Middle School. So that was, you know, the road I took to get to school when I was in middle school. And, you know, learning about the horrors that took place in that school, and then now it's a dilapidated building, and they didn't even turn it into a museum. It's just, they can't tear it down, I don't think. They build a park around it, but it's just in decay. This story from Canada really resonated with me because I think that reflects kind of what was going on in the world, you know, with respect to Native populations. And, you know, I recognize that, you know, the Native story is a different story. My grandmother was a Native American woman. And, she often did not tell us stories about growing up because she really didn't like her life until she got older. And she told me that. And so a lot of that stuff is lost now that we've buried her. But I do feel connected to these stories, and I do feel like it's necessary to talk about them. My bad, I ate up all that time. Do want to hear your reaction, Q.
To our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, I think the thing that caught me off guard more than the startling number of bodies that were found is that these schools were church run, and just the history of churches, and I'm assuming, Christian churches, and the kind of cloaking they provided for really bad people for a very long time is pretty disgusting. Church-run schools being responsible for people being murdered because they didn't look, speak, or believe the way you do is pretty disgusting. And I'll kind of leave it there. That hearing those words is the part, being raised by a Baptist minister myself, that definitely maybe shouldn't have caught me off guard just based on some of the history, but definitely did. And like you said before, we do stand in solidarity, not just with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, but people all over this country and all over the world who have been marginalized, abused, torn down, segregated against. The list goes on. This space is for you as well, and we really want you to know that.
Sure. And while we're here, this is a part of the reason why, like, as much as we'd love to talk about Cuba, I would love to talk about Cuba. It lies just beyond the scope of what it is that we talk about on this show and what we're able to speak to. But I implore you to inform yourself about the goings on in Cuba and support in any way that you can. My other grandmother is from Cuba, so I'm kind of right in the middle of both of those stories right there. And I have a connection to the island, of course, and to, my family in Florida. So, but, for what we do, I'm very happy that we get to do it. And I'm very happy that you take the time out of your day to listen to our show. And I think that, while we're on this subject of, Native children and kind of the history, I know that there's a lot of people who really don't like looking back at the past. We talk quite a bit about critical race theory and all these sorts of things. I recognize that it's uncomfortable, but I also recognize that the only way that we heal is if we acknowledge what's happened and we start trying to piece together a path forward that honors the experience that we've been through. So with that said, I think we're going to leave it right there. So once again, thank you for tuning in to Civic Cipher. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
They call me Q Ward.
Show producer, DJ Swirl. Hit the website, civiccipher.com. Download this and any previous episode that you would like to check out. You can also check us out on YouTube and make a donation. The show grows with your help. You can also suggest topics and follow us on social media if you so choose. And until next week, y'all.
I can do anything. Take a look. It's in a book. Reading rain. Oh, I thought y'all were going to cut me off.